everybody. This is Eric Adams. I'm the managing editor of the AV Club. And I'm so honored to be moderating this Comic-Con at Home panel about Mystery Science Theater 3000. We've got three esteemed panelists who have been involved with the show through its many, many phases of life, beginning I don't know how this is arranged on your screen, but on my screen, to my left here is the creator and host of the show, Joel Hodgson.
Hello, I am Joel Hodgson.
Immediately below me is Bill Corbett, who you may remember as Crow T Robot and The Observer.
Hey, everyone.
And then down over here, this is going to look very silly if it's not arranged in the same way.
It's not true on my screen already, so.
It's not at all.
Well, somewhere in this grid is J. Elvis Weinstein, the original Tom Servo, and Dr. Larry Earnhardt.
I have to correct Weinstein.
Weinstein.
Ever since the Harvey thing, I need to be clear about it.
Ooh, yeah.
Very important to make that distinction, I think.
Yeah.
So how's everybody doing? It is a strange time to be having this conversation, I feel like.
It is.
Yeah.
I like how it's less crowded than actual Comic-Con.
Yeah, have you been doing any waiting in line in your homes or attending any large-scale panels?
Yeah, I've just been waiting in line for the bathroom. Am I right? I'm a Dave Berg cartoon.
Yeah, it is interesting that you don't have to travel to San Diego and kind of sweat through where you're going to stay and how close it is and how to get around stuff. It's a lot nicer. And that's how I knew I could get these guys.
That's right.
It'd be easy, right?
No travel expenses.
I love low effort.
Yeah, right.
I have to say, like the other day I was thinking, kind of just very kind of spoiled and selfishly about all the stuff I missed about, before pre-coronavirus. Like it's starting to be summer here. It's kind of the time when when it really pays off to be in Minnesota. Right. But among those things was not traveling and going to airports. It was just like, boy, it's really been nice to not do that for a while.
Yeah. Has anybody had to travel by plane, like, since the coronavirus?
No.
It would have to be a very high-paying mission.
No, I've had a few friends that it seems terrifying.
Yeah, little box of microbes there in the sky.
My cousin is a pilot for Delta, and he's been, kind of keeping us abreast about how that's been going the past few months. And it does not sound like a pleasant experience.
No. Is he? At least they can lock the door.
Yes. They got a very efficient shield there.
Okay.
Piloting the plane in like silkwood suits.
Bill, you mentioned you're in Minnesota. Josh and Joel, where are you speaking to us from? If you feel comfortable letting us know.
Sure, I'm outside of Philly. I've been here the last 10 years.
And I'm in Los Angeles.
So we're spanning the continental U.S. here. I'm in Chicago, so
Hey.
Yeah, here in the Great Midwest, the home of Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Absolutely, and I mean, Bill's still pretty close to where the studio was.
Very close, yeah. It's. I just kind of, home pigeoned my way back here at some point because I lived in LA since the show and came back when my wife and I were having a second kid, basically. But yeah, wound up in the same second ring suburb where the Best Brain studio was.
Do you know what the studio space is now?
Oh, it's the most nondescript, like medical instruments place or something.
It's right. Yeah, it's kind of like part of the studio is now like some kind of workout thing too. There's like private, like trying to think the last time when we were on tour, we were in Minneapolis and we drove out there. We also drove out to KTMA and we actually walked in there. It's like some rental place now. KTMA, it's like a pole barn that they turned into a studio. And now it's like a equipment rental place. So we walked in there and we're like, the studio has like air compressors and stuff like that,
right.
like to rent stuff. So it was really interesting. But I gotta say, I mean, the fabric of Minneapolis and just the kind of the way the people are has so much to do with us kind of getting going. It seems like they're always like super encouraging. Like oh, that's so nice. That skit you do is so good. Keep that up, you know? It felt like, you know, they always really were encouraging and nice to us.
Yeah, and especially in that era when the comedy scene, as it was back then, was flourishing. There was just this supportive air in the Twin Cities of everything comedy, and it was a great place to be an artist of any kind, really, because, you know, unlike LA where you say I'm a comedian, they go, me too, here, come to my show. You say it in Minneapolis, they're like, oh, really? Oh, that's very interesting.
And that's kind of how everybody knew one another when the show was starting out, correct? You had all crossed paths in the comedy scene?
Well, I had started my comedy career as a teenager just a couple months before Joel had sort of ended his hiatus from comedy and came back to stand-up. And at that point, Joel taught a stand-up and creativity class, which I enrolled in. So I got to know Joel through his class, and then we stayed friends afterward.
Were you actually 14 then?
No, I was 15 when I started doing stand-up.
And you rode a moped from St. Louis Park, right?
I did, yes.
Crazy.
Oh, yeah, I think I turned 16 during our shows at the Ha Ha Club together after that class.
Right.
And then, Bill, where were you at this time? Were you already in the Twin Cities?
I'm from New York, and I came here in about 1990 when so yeah, they were already started, and I got to know the show pretty soon after that, just because of mutual friends. At one point, I was actually at a party at Best Brains. I don't know if Joel even remembers, but I was just like, I mean, because I didn't introduce myself or anything, it was just like some mutual friends in comedy. And that's how one of the ways I got to know the show was to be in the studio and going, what is this? This is amazing that this is happening in the Twin Cities. Like there's TV happening here. But it wasn't a couple of years later until I got to know like Mary Jo and Mike Nelson and then everybody else. A few of them had actually taken classes with me because I was teaching playwriting and screenwriting at a place called the Playwright Center. And I was always sort of adjacent to the sketch comedy scene, not really the stand-up comedy scene, but yeah, it's a small, you know, kind of cool, creative community. And it doesn't feel like a place where you really need to pigeonhole yourself that tightly, at least for long.
Well, also too, our kind of thing, I think in a way it's sprung from comedy cabaret, which was kind of a, you know, there was Dudley Riggs, which was kind of the big improv thing. And then stand-up kind of started, and that was Scott Hansen and Scott Novotny started this thing called the Comedy Cabaret, and it straddled stand-up and improv. And so it was really neat, and it was really, like Bill said, there wasn't a lot of pigeonholes as to how you could entertain people. And so I would say Josh was really more of a stand-up, and Trace was more of an improv guy. That's how I remember it. Kind of like, I don't think I ever saw Trace did a monologue as a character, Quavius. And he kind of
he did other stuff. I mean, he had a stand-up act.
Yeah.
He actually had an act, but his way into comedy was through improv classes.
Yeah, I don't think I ever saw that, but I saw Quavius, which really became Dr. Forrester ultimately. But he did this amazing thing. It was brilliant, and so that's what made me think of him when I was kind of pulling this together. But it kind of was. I felt like Josh was stand up and Trace was improv, but maybe he did stand up too.
I did my first road trip ever when I was 16 years old during spring break from high school with Trace, and we went to Wilmer, Minnesota, Faribault, Minnesota, Beulah, North Dakota, Flandreau, South Dakota, and Mobridge, South Dakota.
Oh my God.
And this was, 80s stand-up boom. So did these towns necessarily all have clubs, or were they
none of them had clubs. It was all just one-nighters in bars of various quality.
How were the crowds?
They were sort of grateful, really. We went to Beulah, North Dakota, which was like this depressed coal gasification mining town, and like the club was like two double-wide trailers welded together. And I was scared to death walking in as a 16-year-old Jewish kid, but it turns out they were pretty happy to have anyone from the outside in.
Grateful to do something besides pull tabs.
Yes, exactly.
I feel like we were talking about the ways that styles and genres seem to be blending in this scene, and I think that's very evocative and kind of epitomizes Mystery Science Theater, that it is difficult to pigeonhole. Like, it's a premise that's easy to explain, but it brings so many different things to the table.
Yeah, I think go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, no, it was just that it kind of became a lot about so much of it was just lots of reference. It felt like pre-internet references, you know what I mean? The world of, like, what do you remember, what's meaningful, and what's that kind of jargon that you use when you're like the shorthand for pop culture. It seemed like, and that was part of stand-up and part of improv. I mean, I never really had any experience with improv at all. I don't think I've ever really done it, but I appreciate it, and it's a great form. But yeah, I came from stand-up too. So, but yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we all sort of, it was an interesting place to meet because we all just sort of brought everything we had seen and heard and consumed in our lifetime to the table, and then sort of compared it with each other to see, did that stick in your head too?
Did it feel like, was it a common language, or did it feel like people kind of had like complementary experiences?
It was Venn diagrams, I think. I was the young one, and so there was certainly a like 60s TV stuff that if it didn't make it to reruns, it probably wasn't there for me, or Fire Sign Theater was a little before my time, but everyone there was very versed in Fire Sign Theater,
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. The Venn diagram just added up to something. We didn't have all of the exact same references, but we had a critical mass at any given time in the show's history. I remember when I was there, I had no experience at all with Tolkien, and every other joke it felt like was Lord of the Rings. A couple of nerds on our staff. And at some point, I realized, oh, that's just not my part of the, it's not my piece of the whole. They can take care of that.
Yeah, the only time it's an issue is when you are having to deliver a joke, deliver a reference that you don't necessarily understand
right.
what it is,
Yeah, there's a trust thing involved, because I'm pretty sure I did riffs that I didn't quite understand.
Sure.
I'm pretty sure. But you just go, okay, well, what's the difference? And that's one of the funny things about the show is we quickly got to the point where we were just doing once we got paid to do it for Comedy Channel or Comedy Central, we pretty much it became so, there were so many riffs that it took the pressure off, you know? It's just like they were all so disposable. So you could just go, I'm gonna say this, even though I'm not certain of it. I trust the other people that wrote it. So it was about, the more we did, the less stress there was, I think, on each actual joke.
I had an experience later on where I was the head writer for Greg Kinnear's NBC talk show. And he had grown up overseas as a diplomat's kid. So he had that same sort of like hole. He just didn't have American pop culture reference base, you know.
But he was handsome.
He was delightfully handsome.
Yeah,
and a funny guy, but it would be like Laverne and who? You know, so I would just have to assure him that this is a funny joke that you should do. You know?
Yeah, I was just gonna say also that not all of the jokes were references. I mean, there were plenty of them, but so many of them and so many of my favorite moments are just based on the weird behavior of characters in the movie at any given time, and so pretty accessible to anybody. I think we all shared a sense of absurdity, either through our own comedic tastes or just being naturally weird people, so that when something weird happened on screen, which was often with some of these movies, you just kind of couldn't pass it up to say something about it.
Once you sort of start seeing the movie as your comedy partner and that they're supplying straight lines, and then you go, oh, wow, this is a great comedy partner because he's throwing me every kind of straight line here.
Thank you, movie.
Catch it, then we're going to get somewhere.
And not to mention you're watching these movies multiple times. So you're kind of like, you're developing a relationship with the movie as you're writing in the episode.
Absolutely. You're learning its timing.
I mean, Trace had a really good analogy. He kind of said the movies were like Margaret Dumont, you know, and we were kind of trying to be the Marx Brothers. So I think that works really nice, you know.
Oh, Mr. Firefly.
There's still a raging debate whether Margaret Dumont understood she was in a Marx Brothers movie. There's still people who believe that, and of course she understood what she was doing, but people go, she didn't know they were being funny.
Right, that's absolutely crazy.
But that's true. It's like a good movie's kind of like has a certain amount of bluster and ambition to kind of pull off a vision, and they're not doing it, you know. So I think that's a part of it.
Right, and Frank Nelson was actually an impatient clerk. They just kept giving him different jobs. Oh yeah!
He was never aware that he was in a movie.
But that's such an important thing in comedy, I feel like, is that playing it straight and kind of, you know, the Frank Nelson, the Margaret Dumont, the Leslie Nielsen of it all, to not acknowledge that absurdity unless you are in the position of being the absurd character.
Well, it's why sincere movies that are not particularly trying for any kind of comedy themselves are the ideal foil for us. Like, to have a 1950s square-headed Universal hero, you know, Universal Studios hero, those guys they gave like no personality to at all. It was just like block-headed leading man. That's just so tasty because they're taking themselves so seriously that it's just, you know, it's Margaret Dumont in another form.
Right, and you don't feel like you're punching down with guys like that.
No. He's kind of up.
Pomposity is yeah. I mean, you want misplaced sincerity.
What are some of your fondest memories of making Mystery Science Theater?
Whoa.
Well, I had the fewest. So. For me, I mean, the golden days for me were KTMA days where there wasn't any pressure and there wasn't any rules and there wasn't any reason to not do stuff, you know. It was just building this thing out that, you know, and it was improv and it was sloppier and it was, it was, you know, underthought in many ways. You know, we spent each show got 24 hours of attention, and that was it. But you know, but the feeling of making something that you know no one else is making, and starting this sort of club around it that grew up in the Twin Cities was a fun time.
Yeah, I was going to say about KTMA, it wasn't super clear how much we should be riffing. Like that was like not, no, I mean, that wasn't clear almost until we made the Cell tape to give to Comedy Channel or Comedy Central, where we go, oh, it should all be riffs, you know, wall-to-wall riffs the whole time. And so that was like an exploration too of how much can people manage. And the truth is all of it, like the whole time. But
yeah,
it wasn't clear when we started at all, like they could manage that.
Yeah, I think that my memory of it is there was a tipping point where we had gotten into the rhythm of adding as many jokes as we could think of, and at a certain point you started to feel the absence of jokes. You know, it's like, okay, now there should have been one there. That was you know, but we had to learn what all those straight lines looked like. You know,
you were astoundingly young too when that happened, Josh. That kind of blows my mind.
I think I mean, I grew up in a joke-rich environment. You know, I grew up, so I really feel like jokes came easy to me, and I started thinking in jokes real early once I started doing stand-up.
Killer joke writer when I met him. So it was like he's always been great at that. He's still great at it, and Trace kind of filled in that other stuff too. Trace had a whole other side that was really lovely that kind of embellished a lot of it too.
And Trace is just a great presence too. I mean, Trace is someone who you like being creative around because he adds to the atmosphere. He's great at yes-anding things. He's great at figuring out the problems that you can't figure out, you know. So, I mean, I hired him later on when I was the head writer of America's Funniest Home Videos years later, you know, and I loved having him in the room just for that same reason, just because his vibe is so great that, you know, he there's something about Trace that makes you want to do good work, you know.
And Bill, what was the dynamic like when you joined the show in the sci-fi years? It had already been established. Like you were kind of walking into a situation where there were rhythms and there were traditions, and you were the new guy there.
Yeah, it was very successful already for quite a while. So my mission was to just not mess it up, really, which I wasn't confident at first that I could do, because, you know, apropos of the discussion about Trace, he was a big absence there. I mean, everybody's absence is felt, but I really do feel like there was some discussion about whether Crow should continue as a character before I came on board. And I think it could have gone either way. It could have just started a new character. Probably not a great choice, but, you know, losing him in those two pivotal roles was a lot. But the vibe was pretty good. I mean, luckily, you know, people loved the show already. So I was extremely lucky to come into a show that had a beloved fan base, unlike these pioneers here on, you know, sharing the screen with me.
I left it before there was a beloved fan base.
Well, I wanted to say too that I love the way Bill approached it, because he did two things that knocked me out. One is, and I don't know if you really, I mean, I don't want to attribute the line that you didn't write, but I love the idea that Crow's there and he's immediately saying, I'm different, which was really clever. And then there was other stuff I read about what you had said, and you were kind of saying, yeah, it's like Crow had a stroke because of his puppetry.
That was me trying to explain my terrible puppetry at first.
But it was such a great way to play it in that situation. You know what I mean? So both those things were really kind of said, oh, you have to kind of start over. You were hitting the reset button both times, which is exactly what people needed.
Yeah, I tried to be frank about where I was coming from.
Yeah, really, really smart. Yeah.
And as far as like good memories of the show, they're pretty much nothing but good memories. But I think it's the days that I loved the most were when we actually filmed. Because as much as I love writing, I started as a writer. I mean, I'm one of those people who loves to have written, like so many of us.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of the writing I did for the show, but I really am like theater kid at heart, that when the crew started showing up and it became real and we got to put on our silly costumes, then it was really just a lot of fun, and just doing multiple takes and making each other laugh. That was kind of the reward.
I mean, the thing that gets me, that's astonishing to me, is just the way we really did the movie segments. We really did them in real time, and there was no other way to do it. I mean, movie riffing in general was really truly like log rolling to me. It's kind of like this moving target, and there was a time code, but back then it had like 10 like numerals, you know what I mean? It had tenths of a second, and it was like, if that was across the bottom of the screen, it was like computer code, and we figured out, oh, you got to knock out a lot of the numerals with tape so you could kind of follow it. But to me, that was always the wildest part of it. And then performing it was crazy, because I was really envious of Josh and Trace and Kevin being able to be tucked down in these space lounges holding puppets with this perfect eye line to the script and the monitor. And I'm like way up here and having to hold my script in my lap, but keeping my sight lines up here and picking up the monitor, and then trying to do this shit, like, oh, I'm pointing at stuff. And so it was always really raucous to me. And when I watch it, I kind of am amazed how smooth it was. And I know, I mean, we did do pickup lines after each like 7-minute chunk. We'd stop and go, oh, I dropped the line, can we redo that? But I'm always astonished. That was the weirdest part of the whole thing, is it's a moving thing, and how do you associate it? How do we even attach a script to it? You know, that's why we improvised the ATMA and didn't start really writing it until we were landed at Eden Prairie.
Well, not to mention also the host segments. The host has to have all their lines memorized, while the bots are fortunate enough to have the scripts out in front of them below the camera.
Made me cuckoo. And I had to learn that shit.
I feel like we've got an interesting and
as if
unique...
it's not hard to actually operate a puppet while you're talking and doing the scene as well.
Everyone has a burden. I hear you.
We got a unique opportunity here with our panel, where we've got each of the 3 main roles of the show represented. We've got a servo, we've got a crow, and we've got a host.
That's all you need.
How
put together a show.
Can you talk a little bit, each of you, about your personal approaches to that particular role, and then also kind of what are the unifying aspects of each of these characters and these roles?
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
So when I played Joel, no. Go ahead, Josh.
Well, I mean, it was Servo, for example, went through a few iterations in the early days. Initially, he was the first iteration was Beeper, which had a sort of R2-D2 like comedy approach, and I realized very quickly.
Just in the pilot, I think we threw that out real quick, right?
Yeah, and I remember protesting, going, well, I'm just not going to get a lot of jokes out this way.
Oh.
And so Joel switched the head and put a gumball machine on him and allowed for a mouth. And then I think the first few weeks I did a sort of Pee Wee Herman-ish pinched kind of voice like this, you know, Marvin the Martian almost.
Yeah.
And then that was hard to sustain for 2 hours. And then I came up with the Tom Servo voice. And that was very much based in, it was kind of like came from the world of WKRP for me. It was like part Herb Tarlick, part Johnny Fever when he became Riptide, the asshole disco TV host. So it was like, that's kind of where the FM radio voice, the obnoxious radio character came from. And then the evil scientist, I chose a very high voice simply so that you wouldn't know immediately that it was the same person doing Servo and the scientist.
I was going to say that the thing that I loved about, you know, Josh kind of figuring that character out was he said to me, like, he named him Tom Servo. He was just Servo. I called him Servo. Josh called him Tom, and he said he saw his name around with quotation marks around like a top 40 DJ. Tom Servo, Bubala Jensen. You know, like, when he said that, I go, holy cow, that's great, and that was really where Servo, you know, kind of happened, you know. Well, I'll do my thing. I mean, for me, what I was dealing with was, you know, I came from doing my stand-up act, which was kind of this kind of hesitating character that really was how I behaved when I started doing stand-up. It really was like me. But then when I kind of moved out of that and started being more of a host, I felt like more like I had to become more dimensional and more of a person. And so that was a big challenge for me. And I don't really personally like, I mean, I'm kind of like, yeah, it wasn't my gig. I really did it because I was the most famous. I was kind of, for a brief time, I was the most famous comic from Minneapolis. And so I could maybe front a show and sell it. So I kind of did it for that reason, but it wasn't like, my favorite thing is creating the stuff and working on it and making it and not necessarily performing it. I was a little more reluctant about that. And so, over time, I think it took years though, I think by the time I was about getting out of there, I felt like, oh, I kind of got this. I understand this, you know what I mean? But that was kind of my take on it. And I was really treating the character like he's a ventriloquist, right? Like he's more neutral, or he's like Dave Seville with the Chipmunks. The robots are these funny things that scramble around and have all these observations and poke fun at him. And he's going, wait a minute, aren't we going to go to Sunday school? Come on, fellas, let's get this together. You know, like, that's what I thought his role was, you know, that kind of fraternal uncle, kind of like he's cool uncle who's babysitting or whatever.
I thought Christian camp counselor.
That's very close. Closer than you know.
No, I do know, but the vibe came through.
Hey, I noticed Andy Kindler went to YMCA camp online.
Yes, as did I. I went to Camp Christmas Tree.
Oh, that's awesome. Were they nice to you, Josh?
They were, at least to my front.
Good.
And then, Bill, you talked a little bit about your approach to Crow earlier.
Oh, yeah. Well, just like I said before, my first approach was to not ruin the good work that everybody before me had, you know, established. And I think at first I was really trying to almost make it seem like Trace had never left. Like I was trying to do his voice. I was trying to imitate his mannerisms. But but a little by little, I think I got, I got the sense that I could just let it gravitate a little more to my natural voice and mannerisms. And yeah, and I just, and nobody said not to. So that, because I didn't, my imitation of Trace's voice was not great. It just sounded kind of tinny and artificial, and I did find a register that worked, and I think he became a little more like Bugs Bunny as a model. And for Brain Guy, there was a very definite influence. We had done a bunch of Universal movies, a lot of which had these British actors in silly get-ups. I remember one called The Mole People that had John Agar as like the square-jawed American dude. But the Mole People were basically a bunch of British actors just made to look ridiculous. They were like the kings of the center of the earth. And this was something that later on in like Galaxy Quest, they dealt with a little bit with Alan Rickman's character. So to me, he was always like a decent Shakespearean actor in exile with a dumb getup on. So he had that sort of pomposity and that like, I don't really belong here. That was my secret behind the character story, at least.
Like Orson Welles in everything he did after 1960.
Yep.
Handing out the standard rich and famous contracts to Kermit the Frog.
I think too, the other thing is just people getting, doing a character, but then having enough breath in there to do voices and dialects and all the stuff that came with it. So that emerged too, because I didn't see that coming. When Trace grabbed Crow, I just said, "Oh yeah, talk like a robot, like talk like the robot from Lost in Space." And you see him doing that, but then he kind of.
There was a lot of yes, Joel Hudson.
Yeah, and he kind of, and then I think during KTMA he started to kind of crack these other spots, and same with Josh too, where it was like you're doing a character, but then you're dropping into a voice or a dialect too. So you kind of had to have that flexibility that you can. Mostly it's my way of explaining it now is the person running the robot is really the robot's personality. And so it's just manifests through,
When you watch older episodes now, can you pick out riffs that you maybe wrote, even if they're coming out of another character's mouth?
Here and there I can, but not as often as you would think. It just became this big slurry of comedy after a while. And by the time we were done, and this is just speaking personally, I can think of some of them I wrote because either I pushed for them, I was particularly proud of them, or not. But yeah, not as much as people think. It's like, did you write that line? It's like, I don't know.
Yeah, people want to. That still is going on online. Like people try to profile who wrote it, and I just consistently say it came out of the writing room. But Jim Mallon would come in and do that too. He'd walk in and go, "Who wrote that line?" And we just go, "It came out of the writing room," because he was trying to go, "That's funny. I gotta assign that to somebody. Come on." And we learned on to go, "Oh yeah, it just happened,
Well, and it ultimately, I learned during Cinematic Titanic years later, whenever a reviewer would review one of our live shows, they would almost 100% of the time misattribute lines that they were quoting to one of the cast members. And so I just realized it just doesn't matter as long as the joke's coming out right. It's us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's also the ongoing apprehension that we only for ourselves. This is carrying riff tracks too. It could not be further from the truth.
Right.
I gladly write for everybody because it's easier that way for among other things. But it just feels more like feels more appropriate. Like there's a writing room to start with, and for a lot of things, like sometimes you start as writing room too with sort of a kernel of a joke, but then somebody takes it and makes it a little better or uses it with another idea, really is a product of one person very often.
And if we can get into the weeds a little bit about it, like what is the assignment process then? When like you've got this line, what's the determination of who says it in the course of the riff?
Well, the way we do it now, and I think it's the way we did it back in the day, was we write everything and then kind of assign it later. You don't really talk about that. I mean, my impression is we don't really decide that in the writing room. It's just kind of academic in a way. And if you notice, I get every third line, so it's kind of like that, you know, whatever. So, but I do think that there's a moment where you go, who does a really good Irish cop, who does this kind of Clint Eastwood voice, and so you throw it to people that way. So I bet everybody has a different impression of that because they've all been involved with I mean, we call it line assign, and we always just do it afterwards, like who says what, and it's kind of, you want everybody to pop and kind of have as much, you know, be involved as much as possible. And so it is really mostly every third joke if you're performing. But I'm sure everybody has different ways of doing it. I'll just let the other guys talk about it too.
That was pretty carried over to the time I was there. It was in some ways just a practical process thing that you needed to keep it moving, be that precious about who gets what joke. Wanted everybody to more or less stay in the game an equal amount. So a lot of it was just round robin, like, all right, it's time for a Servo line or whatever. But yeah, all said, every now and then it just felt like, all right, that really has to go to Kevin because he sings well, or Mike does a good Nick Nolte impersonation, so he gets that, or whatever. I mean, there are a lot of variations on that.
Yeah, and I think.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. The only other sort of variable is, you know, assuming that you're sort of taking turns as you go through. There's going to be times where someone gets 3 really soft jokes in a row, and it's time for them to have a hard one. You know.
Yeah.
There are just times where that rhythm works out, where, you know, some jokes just aren't as good, but they still got to be there. So if you get stuck with a bunch of those in a row, you start feeling like the weak link, and it sort of undermines your confidence a little bit.
The cool thing is everybody gets so many opportunities, so many jokes, that it's really easy to not be precious about any given joke. Or like, I have plenty of insecurities as a person, but that is something I've never really felt at Mystery Science Theater or at Riff Tracks. It's just like, I'm going to get plenty of funny stuff, so don't sweat this one joke.
Yeah, and I'm filtering it more through the live shows of Cinematic Titanic, where there is a palpable feeling of, he got a laugh, she got a laugh, he got a laugh, you know? And you're
right.
like,
what am I, chopped liver?
Right.
Well, it's such an interesting format to then take into the live setting, because, I mean, how does that impact the way that a riff is formed? Because when you're writing it for TV, obviously you're not getting the live feedback of the audience.
It's a lot more precise, I think. I mean, you have to land the line with the timing exactly, so that it gets the laugh that you're going for. It, you know, with TV, you can sort of in post-production slide it a little bit, and B, without an audience, you're not playing for that timing, you know. But you also have to be just hyper aware that, okay, that laugh just stepped on my line. I'm not going to deliver my line because I need to keep the overall rhythm of the show intact.
Yeah, when we do our Riff Tracks live shows, we do a pass on the script that's pretty much just to make it a little more slick and a little more spacious for live shows. Like the wordier jokes have maybe an extra degree of editing, But yeah, exactly what Josh says. Sometimes you're up there and it's just like, yeah, that one didn't land. So you can either bail on a particular, I like doing improv here and there in our live shows when I know something is not working, just to come up with something else. It doesn't happen a lot, but it's fun to, and there's like that Johnny Carson thing too, of like, sometimes it's hilarious when a joke we've worked on for a while just like goes pew. And so since we're getting a lot of laughs anyway, it doesn't really feel that toxic. But Josh is right. I mean, it's a whole different, very precise thing.
The other piece is is kind of like after you say a joke and then putting beats in there for when the audience reacts, so that you have to kind of build in the breathing room. And some jokes get a surprise reaction way bigger than you expect. And then the art of it is laying out and dropping lines that are great, but they'll never hear the setup. And so really, I feel like when we just did the MST3K live tour that just finished like right before the pandemic. And it was like, the big part of it is, the art of it is editing while you're doing it live and throwing out stuff that is not going to track with their ear. So much of it is just dropping things too that get covered up with reactions. So that's another piece of it.
Yeah, and it has a lot in common with stand-up. It really does, in terms of the amount of thinking you have to be doing at once on stage in order to pull this thing off right.
We have a weird, sorry, go ahead.
Stand-ups get to stop though. The movie never stops.
No, it's a runaway train. I was just going to say, we have a weird thing because we do these Fathom event live shows. Our natural tendency is like, if something is getting a big laugh, like Joel described, just lay off the next joke, because it's, that's greedy and unnecessary, and it feels a little flop sweatish. But we were told at some point, just do it anyway, because you're hearing the live audience in the theater you're in right now. But for somebody in like the Eden Prairie Mall listening to it, the sound mix is different. So you might want that joke in there. So it's a weird, dizzying little thing.
What do you think it is about movie riffing that's managed to endure all these years? It's been more than 30 years since MST3K started. Y'all have been able to do this type of comedy in different settings and in different formats and in different forms all this year. What is it that not only keeps the audiences coming back, but keeps y'all coming back too?
Well, I think at its heart, it's just so playful, and that a little kid can see those silhouettes and see a goofy movie and immediately understand, like, oh, they're doing what I do. They're like riffing and saying funny things. And so I think there's just that immediate, like kind of pump there that says, oh, I think I understand immediately what's happening. And so I think it's kind of primitive in a way. And there's layers. I think then there's layers because of the way we write it and the subject matter we get to, and it's so diverse. So that's my take on it.
I think there's something about just the reason that this particular kind of comedy works so well is that comedy is based on surprise, and every one of these comments is a surprise because you're watching a movie. There's not supposed to even be that joke there. So you always have that extra element of the audience, if you're doing stand-up, the audience knows the rhythm, they know when the punchline's coming because you've established the setup, but they can't see the setups coming when you're doing movie riffing, so each joke has that extra sort of turbocharge to it that it's always going to have that, it's always going to get boosted by an element of surprise.
Yeah, I think Joel and Josh have said it well. And Joel, you said something about playfulness, and I think that is part of it too. It stays lively and in the moment if at its best, and it really is like silly, but it can also be kind of not accidentally profound, but you know what I mean, land with a little more depth here and there, but you don't feel the gears grinding. It's a very playful form, and it's really, really fun to do. And I think at the bottom line, besides obvious, like, well, it makes money for us all, but I don't think I would have kept it if it wasn't so much fun, because it's really a treat to do, especially live.
I think that should do it. I think we're about at 45 minutes here. If there's anything else y'all wanted to say, or
well, does anybody got anything to pitch? I mean, I got some at the end here, but if you guys got anything you want to throw to,
I got a few things. I got a stand-up album called Chunks that's available wherever audio streams. I'm co-starring in a movie called The Fiddling Horse that just came out for on demand. I'm co-starring with Andy Kindler in that. It's a comedy. And a movie I directed, a documentary called Michael DeBar, Who Do You Want Me to Be, is available July 10th everywhere you on-demand things.
That's pretty cool. That's all I can say.
I've seen the documentary. It's really brilliant. So I can endorse that.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I want to talk about is Josh and Bill have agreed to do a riff with me for charity. We wanted to do something, and of course, there's a bit of a time quake going on, because we're recording this. This is before 4th of July, and it'll be played at the end of July. So in the meantime, we're going to figure this out. So hopefully you can go to mst3k.org or mst3klive.com, one of the two, and we're going to have a benefit that benefits Megjegyzett, which is a Indigenous people center in Minneapolis that got burnt down during the riots. So we're just throwing in to try to raise money for them, because again, Minneapolis is the place where it all started, and it's going to be the place where everything gets renewed as well. That's going on.
In my hometown.
That's incredible. I can't wait to see that. And what a great way to bring it back to Minneapolis, and keep on doing this comedy for a good cause.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're great that way.
Hey, thanks so much, Eric, for doing this, and thank you, everybody at Virtual Comic-Con. People are watching. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks to you.
Here's some trivia for you. I actually met Bill at Comic-Con for our 20th anniversary panel.
That's true, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. And we've hung out a lot since.
We have.
We still like each other. Well, speaking personally, I like you.
Because we never worked together.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully this benefit riff doesn't put that to the test.
No, my love is only strong.
It's already at the boiling point. I can tell.
Maybe one a different way.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Joel.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Josh.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.